AQUABIZ, all the best knowledge for aquatic system.
So, it's almost good afternoon or good noon, but first of all, thank you everyone for coming here. As Darani introduced me, my name is Benny, and I'm the Senior Director for Phibro Aqua. And I'm very, very happy that we have this opportunity to have a very intimate and close technical discussion. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be presenting on phytogenic, and more importantly, how they affect gut health. Now, I hope that after the great lecture of Dr. Orapint, I will have something new for you, but I'll do my best. So, let's see. So we'll have a very short introduction. We'll talk about gut health and the importance of gut health, although I think Dr. Orapint summarized it very well for us. We'll talk about phytogenic in aquaculture, and then the majority of this 20 minutes or so talk will be on trials which were conducted in order to assess the influence of phytogenic on gut health, whether it's immunity, metabolism, and of course performance. Now, before we even try or start to discuss on gut health, let's have a really high-level look on what gut health means. Now, if we look at the structure of the gut, we have, like many things in life, it is separated into three. We have, if we look at fish gut lumen, then we have the mucus layer up here. Whoops. There you go. You had a spoiler. So we have the mucus layer where we will probably see the microbial community, the microbiome. Then we have the layer of the epithelial cell and the tight junction, which will dictate the permeability of the gut. And then the last layer is the lumina propria, which is mainly composed of the immune parameters of the, in this case, the fish. If we look at the diagram to the left, we see that if we compare the fish one, then we have the peritrophic matrix, which is a chitin layer, which kind of blocks the entry of pathogens. But also, this is where we see the microbiota. We'll have the tight junction and the epithelial cells similar to the fish. And then, when it comes to immunity, we don't have the adaptive immune response. We have only innate immune response. So we'll have less immune components or different immune component. And the main message is that when we talk on gut health, it could come from different aspects. It could come from the mucus layer, it could come from the epithelial cell, and it can come from the immunity. And each one has its own benefits. So we need to really, really understand what we are trying to improve when we're saying we want to improve gut health. Now, regarding phytogenic in aquaculture, there is a huge amount of phytogenic used in aquaculture, and I've listed here just a list of few of them. Now, just as a high level, phytogenic are plant-based natural components or compounds which are used in the diet, and the overall idea is to improve performance. If we're not improving performance, then there is no point in using them. So it could be either phenols, saponins, or essential oils, many kinds of phytogenic. And when we want to see what's the effect of phytogenic, and I hope there's no clash between this lecture and the previous one, but we mainly look at 5 main components or 5 main effects. The first one is the production of digestive enzyme. Then we have improvement of digestion and absorption, improvement of the microbial community, the microbiome, enhancement of the intestinal morphology, And last is the reduction of production of inflammatory cytokines. Now, if you would look at literature like 25 years ago, most of the literature would go on improving the morphology and enzymatic activity. Now, when you look at gut health, you see that pretty much everything is on microbiome and the microbial community. So I'll say that it's a matter of trends. I don't think that one fact is more important than the other. I think it's something which complements everything. And when we want to assess gut health, we need to look at the different parameters and to see whether or not the phytogenic we want to use is actually giving us the benefit that we're looking for. Now, as I said earlier, we have a lot of phytogenics. And in this lecture, and it will be, I think, interesting because it was mentioned earlier, I'll be focusing on saponin and why saponins. They are a secondary plant compound, which is all the phytogenics. They contain a lipophilic and hydrophilic parts, which enables them to cross a bilayer membrane, which is very important for their functionality. They can be found in several molecular forms. And what's caused mainly confusion when we are talking about saponin is the fact that they are known for their hemolytic and pesticidal effect. But this is where we need to pause, and we need to understand that not all saponins are the same. We have toxic saponins and we have non-toxic saponins, and mainly the toxicity will be related to the micelle coefficient concentration. When we have high micelle coefficient, then we will have toxic saponin. When we have low micelle coefficient concentration, then we will have a non-toxic saponin. And in this case, I'll be focusing on Kilaya and Yucca, which are known to be very beneficial, unlike tea or soy, which you are all familiar with. Now, just to make sure that we are all feel confident with saponins, there is huge amount of data in the literature showing that saponins have beneficial effect on aquatic animals, whether it's growth, whether it's FCR, whether it's survivability. And as mentioned, when you look at eucosaponin, we are talking about nitrogenous compound reduction. So we know that saponin are highly beneficial for aquatic animals when they come from the right source, meaning when they come from Kilaya and Yucca. Now, I'll start to review several studies which investigated the effect of saponin-based product or additives on gut health. And if you remember, we had 5 parameters. And the first parameters was the production of digestive enzymes. So in this trial, we had control versus a saponin-based product, 4 replicates, 28 days, 30 shrimp per tank. And we used 2 kg per metric ton. And we are looking at digestive enzymes, as I mentioned. And let's look at the result. I'm focusing only gut health, meaning I'm focusing at the moment on enzymatic activity. And we look at the enzymatic activity in the hepatopancreas, and we see elevation in the amylase activity in the hepatopancreas in a significant way. And what more important for our discussion today, when we look at the enzymatic activity in the gut, we see elevation both in amylase and lipase in a very significant way, meaning that we see that as a result of the inclusion of saponins into the diet, Kilaya saponin, we have elevation of enzymatic activity. Now, we try to understand how saponin cause this elevation of amylase activity. Now, we know that saponin are glycosides which contain polycyclic agglicons. And polycyclic agglicon serves as a substrate for amylase, which triggers their activity. Amylase catalyze the hydrolysis of starch into sugars, and monosugars are the blocking stones for chitin formation. Now, all of you know very well that chitin is one of the most important components for shrimp growth. This is how they grow, by molting. So higher amylase activity leads to higher formation of chitin, leading to higher growth. Second study was conducted here in Thailand, in Kasastat University. You saw all the data from Dr. Orapin's study. It was conducted by Dr. Orapin. But here I'm looking again only on the enzymatic activity. And we had control versus saponin-based product, 6 replicates, 8 weeks, 25 shrimp per tank, starting at 2 gram shrimp. And we look at the enzymatic activity. And again, we see elevation in lipase activity and elevation in protease activity. We see that it's similar to what we saw in other trials, in the former trial that I've presented. So the first one was enzymatic activity. The second one was enhancement of digestion and absorption. So looking at a different trial, which we conducted in Thailand, looking at 3 different treatments, and this is interesting because we use control with 9% of fish meal. Then we use what we call negative control, which is without any fish meal but with soybean meal to replace it. But we added saponins to the diet. And the third one was the negative control, meaning soybean meal diet without saponins. We had 4 replicates for 60 days with 100 shrimp per tank. And the results are highly interesting because what we saw is that for protease, we have the highest was the control with the fish meal, but not far after it, we see that the negative control with the saponin product had a very, very similar protease activity, which both were much higher than the negative control. When we look at chymotrypsin, another very important enzyme for protein utilization, we see that the control had 80.5 unit per milligram of protein, but then when we look at the negative control, which is the, I remind you, soybean meal diet with saponin at a dose of 1 kg, we see much higher levels of the chymotrypsin. What was even more interesting in this trial was when we look at the essential amino acid profile. We can see that for the essential amino acid profile, we had 22.9 in the sum total of the essential amino acids, with a higher level of both leucine, lysine, and methionine. And those essential amino acids are, first of all, are not cheap, and they are critical for the growth. So we have both enzymatic activity and the profile of the essential amino acid was superior when we added saponin-based product into the diet. Moving on. So, looking at a trial that was conducted in Indonesia, control versus saponin-based diet for 60 days, 6 replicate, 180 shrimp. And here we look at the protein level. I remind you that we're talking about improvement of digestion and absorption. And one of the indications for better absorption is the protein level. And we look at both protein level and protein retention, and we see that in both cases, the addition of saponins into the diet improve protein utilization, especially we see it in the protein retention. Now, I haven't showed any performance data yet. And when I started this talk, I said that having nice analysis without seeing any improvement in performance doesn't mean much. And we can see that when we look at the performance from the previous trial that I've just showed for the protein retention and protein analysis, we see higher final biomass, we see better weight gain, and we see much lower FCR, all significant. And I'll say that for all the trials that I will present today or presented today, the default is that we had better performance. Because if we don't have better performance, no use for us if there is high enzymatic activity or a high immunological profile. We need to justify the investment that your and our clients are doing. Okay. Looking at microbiome, or the microbiota in the gut, We know that microbiome are highly important for the host. It doesn't matter if it's, in this case, shrimp or it's fish. We're looking at improvement of immunity, improvement of metabolic process, utilization of nutrients. So we know by now that the microbiome community is highly important for the host. And usually we will look at two parameters. One is the diversity. What's the alpha diversity? Have we increased the diversity? Because a more diversified community means a more stable community, means that we can exclude pathogen in a more effective way. So we will look at the alpha diversity, but we will also look at the strains which were upregulated or downregulated. And when we look at the results from the using of phytogenic, we see reduction in strains, or in this case, we're looking at the phyla level, so it's quite high level, so it could contain both pathogenic and non-pathogenic, but we see very clear that there is elevation of positive bacteria, such as in this case Bacillus. So we know that we increased the alpha diversity, and we also manipulated the microbiome to be more beneficial to the animal. Now I'm moving from shrimp into fish. And this study was done in Canton, in Vietnam. And before we look at the trial itself, we're now looking at enhancement of intestinal morphology. So we had digestive enzyme, we had better utilization of nutrients, and we had better microbiome. Now we're looking at morphology. We had 3 treatments with 6 replicates, 540 fish, 30 per tank for 83 days, 2 dosages versus control. We had 200 gram and 500 gram of a saponin addition to the diet. Starting with performance, we had better SGR and better weight gain. Looking at SGR, we had 14.7 and 706% for the 200 and 500 respectively. And for the weight gain, we had 30% higher weight gain and 17 increase in weight gain for the 203 and the 500 diet. But we are looking at intestinal health. This is what we want to see. What's the morphology? And looking at the result, A is the control, B is the 200, and C is the 500 gram per ton. We see that there are more villi, it's more dense, and they are longer. And by having longer villi, which are more dense, we have more surface area for absorption of nutrient. We have better utilization of the feed. So I think we can do check on 4 items. Now let's look at the last item. The last item is the reduction in production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And in this time, I'm looking at yucca saponins and yucca polyphenols. Polyphenols has antioxidant activity, and they're known to be a very good free radical scavengers, but they also, as saponin, known to have anti-inflammatory activity. And when we look at NFKB, this is the graph to the left, NFKB is stimulating the synthesis of nitric oxide, which is a pro-inflammatory agent. And we see that if we look at the x-axis, when we go and increase the dose of euchos, we see reduction in the expression of NFKB, meaning we managed to have our anti-inflammatory action which we were trying to get. So, I see Darnie is standing here. I don't know how much time I have, so I'm a bit concerned. But that's the last slide. So, to conclude, we saw that phytogenic has beneficial effect on gut health. And when we drew even deeper, we looked at saponin addition into the diet, and more specifically looking at Kilaya and Yaka saponins. We see that they managed to improve the feed conversion and the protein efficacy. We see that it managed to increase the production of digestive enzymes. We looked at the gut morphology and we see more villi with a higher, longer length and more dense. We improved the antioxidant status of the gut. And when we look at microflora, we have more diverse population with more beneficial strains in it. So overall, I think we can conclude that phytogenic in general are highly beneficial, and Kilaya and Eucasaponin can be very interesting supplement to diets. Thank you very much.